The scene has changed so much newspaper-wise. It's also changed that much music-wise. There weren't concert promoters when I started out. There were teen centers, there were CYOs. You also had the college circuit because you would have groups like the Kingston Trio or the Swingle Singers. Very middle-of-the-road, folky groups playing a lot of colleges. Colleges, when the beat scene happened, started opening coffee houses. So acts started playing there because the difference was we could play a CYO, we could play a synagogue concert, we could do this, but colleges had a student activities fund. So there was always more money when you played colleges. And you always knew you would have a crowd because people who lived on campus really didn't have much to do at a lot of schools. Unless you lived in New York City and you were going to Cafe Wah and hanging out in the Village, you went to a show at NYU. So I went to the University of Maryland starting in 1965, and I immediately became a member of the Student Union Board, which gave me access to the artists that were coming into school. So in actuality, I started writing about music before I started at the Star. I started for the Maryland Diamondback, and I remember my first story was on Jerry Blavitt, who was a disc jockey in Philadelphia, where Barry Richards pulled his shtick from, the Geeter with the Heater, the boss with hot sauce. That all came out of Jerry Blavitt.
What happened? Now, you mentioned, what's interesting, you mentioned the concerts, like the stuff that took place at Maryland. I mean, and some might have been from student union money, some might have been outside promoters, or a combination of both.
It was very rare when I attended the University of Maryland for an outside promoter to come on campus to do a show. What was more likely was whoever represented the artist, whatever agency, would cut a deal with the campus to have the show done there, and it would be a University of Maryland campus production. So a lot of music revolved around the campus, the teen club scene, and the few clubs that allowed music. There weren't really promoters. There were promoters that happened by default. And who did they become? They became the disc jockeys who played the records. Tiger Bob Raleigh at WPGC started out running Tifereth Israel Synagogue on 16th Street and doing dances, teen dances there. You had CYO dances. You had guys like Barry Richards, who saw that he could promote his career and make extra money by doing acts at teen centers. Wheaton Youth Center, Jack Alex. You had Jack Alex in Virginia. You had Barry Richards in Maryland. You had Tiger Bob Raleigh all over the place. And they promoted shows. And then other people started saying, wow, these guys are filling these small venues. Let's try to find bigger venues and let's become independent promoters. You had guys like Dickie Klotzman out of Baltimore, who, in my mind, did a lot of great shows, but for me was one of the worst guys in the world to deal with as a promoter. He wanted you to write about a show in advance, and then he didn't leave your passes for you to see the show. He also had a strong-armed guy, an African-American guy with a shaved head named Smothers, who carried a .38 snub-nosed revolver, and I know that because he pulled it on me. He was the antithesis of what most acts wanted to see as a promoter, but he was bringing acts in. You had guys like Mike Schreibman, who, while he didn't have money of his own, found backers, and his main backer was his brother Victor, who was a real estate developer in Puerto Rico, who would finance Mike doing shows. Mike did some incredible shows, from Led Zeppelin, The Who, to just really great shows, but for some reason, Mike had the reverse Midas touch. He never made money. People would push their ways into his shows. Groups like The Who would extort more money backstage from him. Maybe he was too nice. Maybe the Klotzman with the armed guard idea really worked better to make money. I don't know. If you wrote for a newspaper and you went into the library and you had a bunch of columns that you wanted to paste into a scrapbook, they would give you a scrapbook. And I have 2 scrapbooks worth of this stuff, and that I got them when I left the Star because my parents had kept clippings. They were proud of their son, the writer. So I got some scrapbooks from them and started unfortunately cutting the column out to paste it in, and I didn't just cut the column. So I don't have a lot of the charts from the time. So my first story for the Star was in February of '67, and it was on Freddie Scott, who had a hit out called "Are You Lonely for Me?" My second column was on a local group who had just put a record out called The Bedford Set. Jerry Butler, The Impressions with Curtis Mayfield. Of course, me hanging out at the Howard Theater really helped me get these stories. This is May 20th, 1967.
And what does this one say for
the Notes and Half Notes?
Yeah.
At the Shoreham Hotel, the Supremes were opening a 10-day engagement. The Shoreham had a room called the Blue Room. James Brown playing at Whitman High School.
I've seen, a picture of James Brown at Whitman. You think he was at the Howard and then kind of made his way over there? Or?
No, because he did 2 shows at Whitman at 7 and 9 p.m. So I don't think. You mean maybe the day before?
Right.
Doubtful. Part of concert touring, used to be that you'd have a date in Pittsburgh, and then you'd have a date in Richmond, Virginia, and then you'd have a date in Cleveland, Ohio. And there might be 3 days in between each one of those dates. And then the smart concert promoters and agents and the group said, this doesn't make sense. When we're on the road and we're not playing, it's costing us money. Start booking us New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, D.C., Richmond, Norfolk, and let us play every night. So concert tours became mapped out.
That kind of illustrates the idea of like these acts being shoehorned into all sorts of places that you can't conceive of now.
Remember the date, 1967. James Brown had 2 choices. He plays the Howard Theater, or if he wants to play in front of a white audience, somehow they figure out where to put him that might draw a white audience. What better place than Walt Whitman High School in Bethesda, in a wealthy area of Bethesda?